This is the Nobel Podcast, where we talk about how to optimize your technology, life, and mind. We're joined by special operations veterans, entrepreneurs, investors, and others who have overcome difficulty to make it to the top of their craft by staying in the fight.
Welcome to the Nobel Podcast. I have John Dalziel.
Good morning.
You were Marine Corps, law enforcement, FBI, and now head of security for Blue Cross Blue Shield
of North Dakota.
Thank you for joining us. Thank you for having a chat with me today. So let's get into it.
Perfect. Thank you.
Where are you from? Where'd you grow up?
I grew up in Princeton, Minnesota. It's about an hour north of Minneapolis, St. Paul. It's a small little rural town, about 5,000 people. We moved out there in 1970 from the cities. And that's where I grew up, went to high school, graduated from high school from Princeton.
Anything from a small town upbringing and kind of, a place that's cold, that's harsh, that you think made you the person you were?
Yes, I think a lot of it was my mom and dad. My mom and dad were really big into service, giving back, the Boy Scouts, the Knights of Columbus, things like that. So my dad always, we were in Cub Scouts, Boy Scouts, so they instilled in us that kind of work ethic and not only thinking about yourself, but thinking about the community. My dad was really big into the American Legion. My dad was a Marine, fought in Korea with the 7th Motor T Battalion, 1st Marine Division. So that always was the juxt of who my dad was.
Were you an Eagle Scout?
No, I made it to life. I tried. My final project was down by the river. It was this path and it got to be too big. And then I think I was a sophomore or junior, and then it just wasn't as cool to continue with Boy Scouts. So I got as far as life. I think that was the second to the last one.
I think that our CEO was the same thing. Like
Yeah, I missed it. It was, the opportunity was there. I just never finished it.
It's interesting to see that people who have successful careers in the military, though, like scouting,
yes,
is a big feeder, and it's odd for the reason that you stopped doing it, that it's not cool, but it was still transformative and fundamental to the building. I think probably the person you are. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but a lot of people have told me like scouting really mattered to them growing up.
Yes, because it was, you could get out and actually do stuff. You did the camping, you did the knots, you did how to survive, and then you did community stuff. So you could get your merit badges and continue to promote, for lack of a better term.
So we ask this a lot of the times. So far, it sounds like you were a good kid, but did you ever have some stories where perhaps you may have bent the rules, got away with it? Were you a good kid? Were you studious, or were you skirting the lines?
I was a pretty good kid. My mom and dad, or my mom was big into school. So if we got anything lower than a B, we couldn't compete in sports or activities. So we had to keep A or B. But yeah, I think for the most part, the juvenile stuff, playing tag, we played tag in town with vehicles, trying to drive around and stuff to avoid the cops and flashlight tag, but doing stuff that other people that I learned, when I joined the Marine Corps and continued on in life, what they did in high school. I just never didn't drink too much in high school.
What sports were you into?
Football, wrestling, baseball, and track.
So did one stand out more than another?
I liked wrestling. I was brutally average at best. My youngest brother, who was a year younger than me, he was a tremendous athlete. He was all conference in football, went to state in wrestling, went to state in track. I just was brutally average at best.
I think wrestling doesn't matter as much. I was a wrestler, and I just love the one person against another, almost naked on the mat. You only have yourself to blame. It's an individual and team sport at the same time.
Yeah.
I learned a lot from that.
Yeah, because you depend on the team, the overall, but while you're in the arena, it's just you and him.
So when did you get into the Marine Corps?
I went to boot camp June 21st, 1981, about less than a month after I graduated from high school.
Okay, so straight in, young kid going into it. What were the movies and stuff leading into that? What was the picture in your head that what boot camp was going to be, and did it live up to expectations?
Picture in my head, I just remember my dad talking about it, and then thinking of not Gomer Pyle, because Gomer Pyle was on, and we never thought of that. But I thought it was going to be a lot tougher than what it was.
Right.
They still could, in 1981, they could still hit us and kick us. You know, when your flutter kicks, you get kicked or you could get thrashed like that. But it wasn't the physical portion of it, the running and stuff like that wasn't as hard as I thought it would be. You know, when we went out and did...
Where did you do it?
San Diego.
San Diego.
The real boot camp. So we did, because we had Mount Motherfucker. So we had to go out and spend the week out there. But it wasn't horrible. I was from a small town in Minnesota. So, you know, you see the total breadth of what the country is, the diversity, things like that. But it was, you know, I thought it was good, but it wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be.
My nephews just went through boot camp. One of my nephews graduated, I think, a week ago, maybe not even.
Oh, nice.
Ago. So from Army, and I think he had the same thing to say, that what was your expectation going in? And I had talked to him about it previously, and he's like, you know, it was actually more like the movies than I thought, because you're just basically like, it's not that hard. But somewhere about like week 3, you're like, all right, now they're going to ramp up. And then they didn't.
Never did.
It never ramped up.
That's exactly it. You had the physical portion, obviously, but there was a lot of the intelligence and the academics, you know, the history of the Marine Corps, all the way through the wars in World War II, Korea, Vietnam, you know, moving through Khe Sanh and things like that. And where we were early 1980, 1981 with everything that was going on in Central and South America. You know, it was basically the touch point there. So, you know, and I had the benefit. I went in, I wanted to do something with helicopters. So that was my contract. But when I got to boot camp, the Marine Corps, always on day one, you take the ASVAB. So I had scored really well on the ASVAB. So then I got switched from my contract to 2600. Signals intelligence is what I did. So we got the benefit of, during boot camp, we had to fill out the background investigation. So the platoon might be out marching or doing whatever. We had to go for, 1 or 2 hours a week, to fill out the background. So we got away from things. So it was nice to set up to get the background, then went to school in Pensacola, which wasn't a bad thing as an 18-year-old kid.
Sure. So let's talk about some of the high points in your Marine career.
My Marine Corps career was really good. Did a lot of traveling, and I was with 2nd Radio Battalion out of Camp Lejeune, and we deployed a ton. Being a single guy, got more opportunities to deploy. So we did a couple of NATO exercises, and then in 1983, I deployed to Beirut, Lebanon as part of the multinational peacekeeping force, and was there. We landed in country in early July. We're there July, August 29th was the first time that 2 Marines had died. Took a mortar shell into the tent. Things were ramping up. IDF, all culminating on October 23rd, 6:20 in the morning, when we got blown up.
So where were you in regards to that physically?
I had because it was Sunday morning. So on Sundays, the chow hall didn't open till 8. But they had a coffee point that opened at 6. So my shift started at 7. So got up out of the rack, went and grabbed coffee, and I actually went into the BLT to go wake up a buddy, because we wanted to go out and we were going to do a patrol down to the marina later in the morning. So I went in, woke him up, walked out of the building and walked to our intel center. The radio battalion was attached to the headquarters of the 24th. So I was about 110, 115 yards away when the explosion went off.
Holy cow.
Yeah, blew me into the wall. We opened up the door and we thought immediately I thought we had taken indirect fire, or they had finally hit the headquarters building. And then everything was blown off the wall in our intel space. And then somebody came running in and said they hit the BLT, the battalion landing team headquarters, which was in an old hotel building. And so me, and there was 4 of us in our comm center. So Mitch and I put our vests on, helmets, and we were going to go while Hack and Chuck stayed and worked. So went out, walked around the corner, and we met 2 Marines coming at us. And their eyes had been blown out of their heads, so they were like dangling down, and they were walking like when you cut, and this is a terrible analogy, but it's the analogy I've always used, is like when you cut the head off a chicken, they still run. Well, these 2 guys came Boris, and the minute we put our arms to them, like, hey guys, they kind of collapsed.
They're just in shock.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And they were dead men walking. So we walked up around the corner, and then you could see it, the smoke was still coming down, and, we're looking for survivors, trying to go get guys. And the first group we went to was right around the corner. The helicopter pilots slept outside of the building. They had like an area where they slept, and near it were little saplings. And we came up to it and saw a guy who had been blown up to the middle of his chest, split up where he'd hit the tree. And it happened to be Captain Walter E. Wint, who we put in a sleeping bag, and then you were carrying him to try and get some help. He was already deceased at the time, and the benefit for us at that time was an AP photographer was there and took that picture, and it was subsequently the next day was in the Minneapolis Star-Tribune on the front page. So my mom and dad could see it and saw that it was me.
That you were okay.
That I was okay. And so then, we spent the next 24 hours looking for survivors. So, the one that we were in digging, found a guy, he's yelling at us. We go down there trying to get in, and he was pinned by a piece of concrete. And whenever they tried to pull him out, he would start to bleed out. So they would put it back down and trying to get him, so we took turns, talking to him for the span of like 3.5, 4 hours before he passed away, knowing that he wasn't going to come out. I'm a 20-year-old kid from Minnesota. The only dead person that I had ever seen before was my grandfather at his funeral. So we went through that trying to find live guys, then spent the next, 3-4 days trying to, get bodies, guys out. And it was a horrific deal. If I can't pull a plug, Jack Carr and James Scott just wrote a book on it. It's called Targeted Beirut. It is a phenomenal read. They had talked to a bunch of us about what that was going on. And the book goes through not only us from being on the ground, but then the whole political in the White House, the Reagan White House, how they're going to respond and things like that. So, we were there. That was October 23rd, 24th. They decide they're going to invade Grenada. But then we left the middle of November. So it's one of those events that happen in your life that molds you in how you're going to handle, the good, the bad, and the ugly through it. It's really shitty. Guys that you knew, that you had coffee with, drank with, are guys you're finding, like the John Olsons, the Maurice Huckles, Walter E. Wint, buddies of mine that I knew they were there 1 minute and then not because of, policies and procedures on how we went through it.
I mean, that's one instance, and there's not a war after that. There's, it's just one bad day. And, I've been in traumatic moments, but mine were quick for the most part, whereas yours were super drawn out. And I've gone through a lot of moments, but not talking to somebody for 3 or 4 hours. So that's pretty harrowing, or seeing the things that you've seen. What were your takeaways from that?
It was horrific. You try to push everything down, you deal with, and I've dealt with it for 41 years afterward, the survivor guilt on it. Why did I leave? Why did the two things of thought, why did I walk out of that building at that time? And when I look back at it, it's the reasons, I never contemplated suicide, but I volunteered to do a lot of deployments afterwards, hoping at some point to come home on my shield. It was one of those that I didn't realize till I talked. My wife's in the mental health field, and she talked me, when we finally opened up about it, things like that. But it's kind of helped form the mantra that I've tried to live by is, living a life worthy of their sacrifice, to continue to move forward on what happened that fateful day in Beirut. And then, little, as we talked about earlier, the disappointment in my country that we didn't retaliate for it, that it took the great country of Israel to kill all 7 of the guys responsible, that we as Americans did not do it with all the military might that we have. That was disappointing to me, that we never retaliated for the 241. It was a shitty day, and I got some closure because as we moved forward, went to college, went to the state of South Dakota, was a criminal investigator. And then when I went into the Bureau, I went to Beirut in 2011 to 2012 as a year as the assistant legal attaché there. I was the only FBI person in country, and I got to go back to the site. Would have been like the 34th, or no, like the 27th or 28th anniversary. And actually, they took me to the site, the actual site of the bombing, and was there on 6:20 in the morning on October 23rd, 2011. And, got to try to get closure, had the same thoughts. But then when got back, went and talked to the ambassador and got permission to raise funds. So the U.S. Embassy in Beirut is the only embassy in the world that flies the Marine Corps colors 24/7. I reached out to some buddies. We were in Beirut together. We raised like $20,000 for the flagpole. The ambassador reached out to General Mattis, who was the CG of CENTCOM at the time. He came and dedicated it. But it's been a never-ending cycle to try and give back, go against anything that I could do to get back at Hezbollah, to try and bring furtherance of that.
I think that is a fair assessment. And it's one of those things that takes a lifetime to kind of get used to come to terms with. And I think it's interesting that later in your life, you got a second opportunity to do that and almost turned it into a third, to know that, something that happened when you're 20 years old changes your life, particularly the dramatic way that is. How many casualties from that? I don't remember.
241. 241 at the time, so it was 222 Marines, 18 soldiers, 18 sailors, 3 soldiers, I think is what it was, if that goes to 241. So I think we'd lost 8 before and 10 or 11 afterwards. So single greatest loss of Marine lives second only to the Battle at Quai San. The FBI came and investigated. Tom Locke did the investigation. Largest non-nuclear explosion at that time since Hiroshima and Nagasaki. It was a shitty day, but it formed the way my life went through. And as your point, you say it took a while. It took me a while to admit that some of the issues that I had were related to that, because I was a Marine, I was a cop, I was an FBI agent. That's a sign of weakness, to admit it until you realize that talking about it and was actually a sign of strength to further on. And, my wife, she's a saint. We've been married 34, almost 35 years and dealing with the craziness that is me. And, bringing it forward was, it's a life-altering event. And everybody, just like you, went through scenarios that were not, maybe not,
the
didn't have
scale is much less. And even some of the ones at the scale that I felt were higher. I mean, that's the scale. That's incredible. I mean, it's just.
And it was because, and we were in such a time that, no social media, no new, there was news. So we were 8 hours. So we got blown up. It was like 12:20 at night on a Sunday morning. So my mom went to work that day. She worked at on an Elam home. And one of my best friends from high school, Jeff Voller, had called my dad at like 10 o'clock in the morning and said, "Hey, Rodney, have you heard from John, or how's John doing?" And my dad's like, "What are you talking about?" And my buddy Jeff goes, "Turn on the news. I will talk to you later." Hung up. My dad turns on the news, and then, it's everywhere. So then he goes into town, talks to my mom, they get it.
Right.
They come back, and at like 3 or 4 in the afternoon, a black sedan pulls up into our driveway. My mom, not a big fan of that. And 2 guys get out, and my dad looks outside and said, "He's not dead. They're not in uniform." So the 2 guys walk up, knock on the door. "Rod and Rosie Dalziel, yes, your son John's okay." And they ask, my mom and dad start asking some questions. They go, "Nope, that's it. That's the information we have." It's because we were an intelligence unit, the CIA station in Minneapolis, who we were, with the whole agency, they had sent them out. So my folks were one of a group of probably 20 parents in the United States that knew that their sons were okay. So people, my mom, went on the radio station, did an article in the newspaper. So other parents are calling like, "How did you know?" Because it wasn't until like 4 or 5 days after that AT&T had opened up the phone lines. So we all got to call. They did so you could call and spend 5 minutes talking to mom and dad and stuff like that. But so they had that little bit of benefit ahead of, we don't know why we're notified, but that's the reason why.
You still have dreams about it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Just about every day. You think about it in different lights, smells, like we all do from being deployed. It's the smells. A song every now and then will come on. Charlie Daniels Band, Bayou Swamp was a big song there, and things like that. Why did I walk out of the building? And trying to grasp, put your arms around it, and the guys, the good, the bad, and the ugly, because it was, there's probably 1,200 of us ashore. We have headquarters, Alpha Bravo and Charlie Company, so 241 killed. It was like 300 injured. So, it was a shitty day. And then, they bring the people in. Then McFarland comes in, Vice President Bush comes over. But then again, we don't fucking do anything about it. Instead of going and schwacking Hezbollah down in the Bekaa Valley, Syria, Iran, obviously.
It's tough because our capabilities, like, we could go do that pretty easily, and you would want to.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess 2 questions. You're super close to the explosion based on what you said. Were you rocked pretty good?
Yeah.
Did you kind of wake up? Did you go all the way out?
I don't think I went all the way out. It slammed me into the wall. So I don't think I went all the way out. but it was just the explosion was just like nothing that it's hard to describe. That it just, you've been through training exercise with explode, but this was just, and I was 100 yards away. There was plenty of guys. There were a group of guys that rode the building down. They were on the top and rode it down to the bottom, and lived through it. Guys that were buried. So
I have found when you have an expectation of an event occurring, it's easier to deal with and it's easier to come to terms with. So when you're on a mission and they're like, you're about to drive over, a road that's IED'd, if you get blown up, like you know what's going on, you can kind of comprehend it a little bit more. And, it turns out a lot of people have been in vehicles that, blew up, but in my time, like those vehicles were safe. But when it happens, you get rocked, you're like, why and when. And I think that those people who joined the military with the expectation I'm going to war are different than those who didn't. And so I think that like people who were drafted in Vietnam, how they adjusted is different than people who volunteered.
Yep.
I think historically that's at least somewhat true. When you're in that situation and that's so far out of the realm of what is possible, you're not at war. You're not expecting war. You had lost guys, so it's not beforehand,
correct,
leading into that, so that it's not impossible at that point. But you're at a point where we're tired of Vietnam, so we're not going to go into another war. Even the hostage rescue was a failure in '80, and that kind of set up the the tier 1 units kind of started. We're starting at that point anyway, and you're at a point where like America at war is the only idea is nuclear from the Cold War. Like that's the only thought of what could happen, and you get blown up with no expectation, and then there's no response. Were you angry from all of this? Like what was the emotion?
Oh, God.
What was the emotion from all of those things? Because it's totally unexpected. Coming to terms with it, I feel like I would be angry.
We were angry. I mean, it wasn't just me. It was all of us that we were seeing that there was nothing. When we started taking shells in August after the 2 guys had died, and we were identifying, I was part of the team that we did direction finding, so we could, we were not only, finding out where the bad guys were, but we could do geolocate them, so we could hit them with mortars if they chose, but they chose to shoot illumination rounds, to scare them, stop, so hit, and, then they rolled in the battle groups. New Jersey was on site, shoot those 26-ton bombs in, so, and it really was. It was so frustrating that we knew we had the capabilities. We had a carrier group in. You saw the planes fly over us every day that we knew where their targets were, and they chose diplomatically not to pull the trigger. It's frustrating. It was huge frustration, and it made you angry. The definition of peacekeeper. That's what we were. We're Marines. That's like a dog on a leash, And yeah, I mean, I'm a huge Reagan fan. I thought he was a great president. The administration, but that part of it was just shit, And they made Colonel Garrity the scapegoat on it. Obviously, we're America. We have to have a scapegoat. So, the colonel was the scapegoat on it, even though they put us in a situation where we were at the airport. The Shoof Mountains were in the back, and he was in a no-win situation. And obviously, he was a brilliant dude. So he got out of the Marine Corps, went and worked another 20 years for the CIA as an expert in the field, and now is living in Phoenix. So, and a great dude. I've been down to visit him several times. Just a brilliant dude. But the frustration, and I hadn't felt it in a long time, the frustration about it till I read Jack and James's book again, and they went into significant detail about the White House and the battles between Caspar Weinberger and, the president, and deciding not to retaliate and engage is just shit.
So I think that the anger, a lot of the time when you get out of the military, and particularly when you've gone through, trauma, I think that is one thing that people struggle to let go of, I think, for the rest of their life. You're angry and you don't know why about things like that. I think the Afghanistan withdrawal for me is pretty tough, to look at that and then see the suffering and why did we do this then? And there's not a good answer. So I'm going to ask you a question that you said you asked yourself, and it's theoretical. You can not answer it. Why were you there?
We were there to be a buffer between the PLO, the Israelis, and the Syrians. Lebanon has been in civil war forever. My stand-up, my belief in it is they put us there to try and keep the Christians and the Muslims in Lebanon from killing each other, which it was impossible to do because you had to pick a side. We picked a side. We gave ammunition to the Lebanese government and we supplied them with weapons. So obviously we picked a side. The Druze did not like that. Neither did the Iranians, the Syrians. So we became a target because we had chosen a side. We weren't legitimate peacekeepers. We had picked a side. And with not allowing to fight, even though we had, M16s, you couldn't put magazines in while we were on station. But when we were out patrolling, we could have magazines in. You just couldn't have one in the tube, which we all know what that's like. So
in the timeline of your life and who you are and the person you became there, in the scope of that, asking that question again, why do you think that you were there in terms of what it did for the rest of your life? Is there an answer or not sure?
Not sure on the change of why we were there. I know at 61, looking back at my life,
I know.
What
did you take from that led you to that? The person who's going to get carried out on the shield, rather that I'm going to go into this, I'm going to law enforcement. You spent your whole career doing that and you continue to do that. Did you get something out of that positive?
Yes. And it took me a long time to figure that out. And actually my wife is the one who brought it up to me that yes, it was a shitty day, but look at the positive that you've done moving forward with the law enforcement, with the state of South Dakota, with the FBI, doing multiple deployments. I deployed thinking in my mind that I could make just a little bit of difference so my two sons or any of their friends would have to go to war. War's a shitty deal. We've both been there, done that, and it's a place that you do not want your children to go. And then subsequently going through retiring, and now I spend a lot of time working with the Brady Oberg Legacy Foundation, dealing with veteran PTSD and veteran suicide. Brady was a local kid that went to Afghanistan, came back, ended up taking his own life. So, that type of deal, always going back to the mantra of striving to live a life worthy of their sacrifice, is what do I do? Does it make it better for the memories of John Olson, Maurice Huckle, Walter E. Wint, and subsequently later in 2021, one of my best friends from the FBI took his own life shortly after he retired from the Bureau. I'm trying to understand. I can understand the darkness. Been there, done that. Spent time in my basement alone by myself, dealing with my demons. But you have to experience the bad, the shitty, to be able to give positive, that growth, that new life. Every time a fire goes through, the trees are born, the trees are stronger, things like that. Those mantras. Yes, Andy, I was listening to you when you told me those things. So
there's a Taoist proverb that says, who knows what's good or bad? And I'll tell you the story really quick. Yeah. And this is a mantra that I believe in very strongly. This is like at Confucius times. A guy is a farmer. His son finds 12 wild horses, brings them home. His neighbor comes and says, wow, you're very rich. And he's like, I don't know, who knows what's good or bad. The next day, his son is trying to break the wild horses, breaks his leg. His son's the only person to help him farm. His neighbor comes by, what terrible luck. He says, I don't know, who knows what's good or bad. The next day, they conscript every able-bodied man. So the army's coming through and they're just taking everybody. They don't take his son because his son's leg is broken. His neighbor comes by and he says, wow, you're so fortunate. I don't know. Who knows what's good or bad for eternity. And so the good is born out of the bad. And so you go through this. It's really difficult in the moment to understand what you see and to judge it. You can't judge it in the moment. You couldn't at 20 years old do it. And maybe it took you to 61. Maybe it didn't take quite that long, but maybe it took you 20 years to come to terms with that day. But I still think a lot of us do that. And everybody in their life, I think that we think that we're fortunate or not fortunate, and who knows what's good or bad. Where's the lesson? And the lesson might not be for many years. So that's something that like I believe in, whatever it is, the good is born from the bad. So like 9/11 was pretty shitty, but there's a lot of great people who stood up. When a terrible war breaks out, usually it's a great time of peace afterwards.
October 23rd for me has played the gamut. It's been good. It's been, the level of shittiness of it, but it's the formation of, now my boys are starting to understand. They're older, 32 and 29. And I gave them copies of the book and said, take your time, read it, but then you can understand, even though we've talked about this, the reasons, the why. Why is dad sometimes messed up? I can tell you the story, but till you read it in black and white and see the whole breadth of it, the totality of it, to understand that there was a method to my madness in why I deployed, why I volunteered to go, why we went to headquarters, why I went back to Lebanon, 5, 6 times, just trying to get some closure for me internally, but also trying to take the battle to Hezbollah. When I was in Beirut, we worked with the Germans. We did a couple of red notices, got 4 or 5 Hezbollah guys on financing, blah, blah, blah. So it's a success, just trying to, as you said, do you know if it's good or bad? That is a great mantra, and it's a great question as I'm trying to think in my head of, yes, it's shitty, but what way more good has come out of it. But I have the benefit of, I'm on this side of the grass. John Olson's 20. Right. These other guys that they didn't get to live their memory. They didn't, and we all do. I mean, I'm sure you have numerous friends that paid the ultimate price for it, for what we do. Was it good? Was it bad?
There's no end. It just keeps going. So I guess it leads into this. I want to get into your career. You went to law enforcement next. I mean, you have a full career. You did the police first.
Yep. South Dakota Division of Criminal Investigation. Spent 6 years in South Dakota. I was working drugs, did basically drug enforcement. The greatest thing about working with DCI was the Sturgis motorcycle rally. So we went out there and worked. I had the benefit of being out there for the 50th anniversary. Okay. So there was the infamous shootout at Gunner's Bar in downtown Sturgis between, I think it was the Outlaws and the Hells Angels. Okay. And literally shootout like the OK Corral. The Angels are in the bar. Couple of outlaws come in, start shooting. They only hit 1 or 2 people, rounds going into the roof. We ended up tracking one of the guys who was bleeding and, followed him out. And, it was just, Sturgis was the wild, wild west, a town of 2,000 that explodes to 250,000 during the rally.
It's like, I guess, Burning Man.
Yeah.
It's the equivalent of the motorcycle Burning Man.
Yes,
right? There's a motorcycle community that shows up in Sturgis every year for I don't know what reason. I'm not that familiar with it.
It started with the races. They just had basic motorcycle races. Okay. And then it got more and more people were coming into it, because I think it's Daytona in February and it's Sturgis in August, and it's 2 weeks. Almost every law enforcement in the state of South Dakota, state, federal, or local, goes out there. We were in 2-man teams looking for warrants, identifying people, outlaw motorcycle gangs, shootings, lots of violence, lots of drugs, just the decadence. Buffalo Chip is a huge campground out there. Motley Crue was performing on stage. They were having live sex acts on the corners. It was like Sodom and Gomorrah. What you would think was Sturgis, and it was just classic. That was always Sturgis, even though we did some other halfway decent sized cases, but Sturgis was always the gem for when I think about my time with South Dakota DCI.
Why do they do it there? There's nothing there, but why do they do it there?
I think because that's where they had started. A group had got together and started doing these dirt track races, and it just continue on word of mouth, I guess. But it literally goes from 2,000 to 250,000 people, and it's unbelievable. Doctors, lawyers, you name it. Every walk of life come rolling in. People ride their bikes across the country on it. Some people trailer them in, and you see these bikes on the interstate. Like, how does this thing get from Pennsylvania to Sturgis, with duct tape and grease?
You just create a town in the middle of nowhere.
Yep.
For a motorcycle, fun hangout, and then
it goes back to a ghost town.
Then it's good people, bad people, crime, peace. I'm just doing here for the freedom.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
Then you have other people like, well, I'm here for the crime mostly.
Yeah, it is. It was great.
That's pretty crazy.
And then the FBI.
What led you into the Bureau? Why did you want to pursue that?
I got in a pissing match with my boss over a case that I thought was bigger than what it should. And so the FBI had started recruiting because they had been a hiring freeze up until like 94. 94, they opened up the hiring again, and then they started hiring more cops. So I got recruited. Charlie Draper.
And you have to have your degree as well.
Yes.
So you'd already gotten your degree.
Yep. I got out of the Marine Corps, went to Winona State, a small college in southeastern Minnesota, graduated from Winona State, got hired by South Dakota DCI, and then got in a pissing match with Dwayne, my supervisor, and then took Charlie Draper up on the offer to test, did the test, and got hired, the background, all blah, 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 and went to Quantico. Was at Quantico. It was during the middle of the hiring that they were hiring a bunch of cops and former military. So of my class, I bet we had just about half of them were either former military guys straight out of the military or law enforcement. So it made going to Hogan's Alley unique because most of us had way more arrests than the FBI agents that were teaching us. And then you get into the no, this is how, in real world, this is how you would do this arrest. And
I'll tell you about this place called Sturgis.
Yeah, exactly.
Hogan's Alley is cute, but...
Yeah, and we had guys in our class like Tim Clementi, who was a St. Louis cop who had been there, done there, and had the T-shirt about it and stuff like that. It was, it was Quantico. So once you realized what it was, is to just get you through it, that happens. So got through that, went to Chicago. Chicago was my first office, worked downtown, worked non-traditional organized crime, basics.
What does that mean? So this is the 90s, right?
Yep.
Late 90s?
Early 90s, 95,
okay.
96.
Okay.
So I was on a non-traditional organized crime. So we worked Serbian heroin.
Okay.
So I worked that for like a year and a half, then went out to the North RA and worked outlaw motorcycle gangs and drugs there. So we worked the outlaws. And then opportunity there was an opening in Fargo, North Dakota. I'm from central Minnesota. My wife's from southwestern Minnesota. She had relation right outside of Fargo. So we went to Fargo. I took my transfer, my OP. With you being have a brother, you understand that, the Bureau offers you one golden ticket in your lifetime, and I used mine to go to Fargo. Went to Fargo, spent time prior to 9/11. I worked domestic terrorism because North Dakota had Gordon Call. He was a militia guy, got in a shootout in 1983, I think, February of 1983, where he killed two U.S. Marshals and blah, blah, blah. So that movement was big in North Dakota. So I ended up, my first tasking when I got to North Dakota was to go around the state. I had 6 months to finish it, to go talk to every sheriff and chief of police in the state of North Dakota about domestic terrorism. What do they have in their areas, blah, blah, blah. And finished that up, did an assessment. We started to work, come up with a plan. Then 9/11 happens. And then you're moved from regular violent crime to everybody's working counterterrorism. They pick one person. I got to be that guy. In Fargo, everything we had was like 2 and 3 effects. They had the 20th, they had Warsami, who was the 20th terrorist hijacker that was in Minneapolis. That was Harry Samet's case down there. But we had maybe some offshoots up there that we did in Fargo, but it still Fargo, still North Dakota. So we did bank robberies, had a case, Dennis Gady, who took the identity of Timothy Wicks. They were in Milwaukee. Timothy Wicks went to Dennis Gady to do his tax returns. Dennis moved to Fargo, took Timothy Wicks' identity, ran up a bunch of debt. Timothy Wicks comes out to Fargo, hooks up with Dennis and was like, hey, somebody took my identity, kind of figures it out that it was Dennis. Dennis ends up, they're having supper. Dennis ends up, goes into the bedroom, comes back out with a 22, shoots him in the back of the head, and cuts his head and hands off, goes out to try and bury him outside. Well, this is like January in North Dakota, so
cold down.
It's froze. So he wraps him up into a blanket, puts him in a U-Haul, takes him into the UP where he has a cabin, and he rolls the body over the side of the ditch and throws the head. It was classic, just story. He goes on the run. We were tracking him, but this is 2002, so we're tracking him via his credit cards, but it's like 4 hours late.
Right.
So we have him on America's Most Wanted. They're all set to come to Fargo to do the case on like the Friday night.
Right.
Well, we find him on Thursday, and long story short, we get him. His wife testifies against him, and we convict him. But he's got this big story that was all part of the Hells Angels, outlaw motorcycle gangs. And he's in the pen in North Dakota. They wrote a couple of books about it. They responded in the UP to this naked body.
UP.
The Upper Peninsula of Michigan.
Michigan, okay.
So they respond. Somebody finds this carcass. And as they're pulling the body up, they look up, and the officers see an eagle flying with a large object in its claws, which happened to be his head. So they went and...
Same story every time.
Yeah, it's just unbelievable.
So you're in the midst of this, and you're seeing something that's morbid, seeing something that's disturbing and bad, and somehow is comical.
Oh, it was because when we started the investigation and you're moving through it, I worked it with our Cass County and Fargo PD and Rick Majerus and Tammy Link. And every time we talked about the case, it was like, well, this can't get worse. And then it continued to get, and it was just comical. And it's not, and no disrespect to Timothy Wicks' family, to him, it's a horrible thing. But Dennis Gady was such a sloth. And he thought that he was always smarter than the cops because he had went to a law enforcement academy in Wisconsin. So he knew that when he shot Timothy in the house, he had poured bleach everywhere. So we couldn't get any luminol to be able to detect. But he went to Fleet Farm and rented all of these items to bury him. And we have this great video of him getting his sawzall, getting the rope, renting the backhoe and things like that. And he dumped Timothy over the side like 2 miles from his cabin.
Right.
So it was,
As the criminal genius
Yes.
is not exactly there.
9 times out of 10, we don't get the smart ones.
Right.
It's the ones that, make a mistake or just, everybody, I'm bulletproof, there's never, they're going to, but, we have sources, if not for informants, we wouldn't catch half of them because, the angels have a great saying, the only way 3 people can keep a secret is if 2 of them are dead,
Right.
So that's why, sources are so instrumental in what we did both with South Dakota and especially with the Bureau. I mean, sources are everything.
Another thing that my brother says is he's like, I don't ever start asking questions until I already know like 80% of the answers.
Exactly.
And so like I don't just like that is what an investigator does. I'm going to talk to literally every single person I can before you if I think you're the guilty one. And then I'm going to go in, I'm going to know like 10 answers that are corroborated. If you lie about one of them, I know you're a liar.
Yep, that's exactly it. And that's the different, and you learn that going through, like when you're a fresh guy, you want to bring the bad guy, you want to bring Slobodan in right away and talk, where's that heroin? But, you learn and, senior guys tell you like, whoa, easy, Sparky, pump the brakes a little bit. We have to get all of this laid up. You got to do the foundation. You got to build the foundation before you can put the roof on. And it just, through experience, you'll learn that. And it is the subject is always the last guy to bring in because you want to have everything. You want to know the answers to all of the questions before you get to the hard one. Like, who's your supplier? Where are you bringing this in? Who's the snitch? Who's giving up the information? Things like that. And I found my biggest white collar case was disgruntled employee, where she decided that she wasn't going to give him the raise that he wanted. So he's like, I'll show you. Here, she's got 2 sets of books. Boom. So it is. And sometimes you want to think, oh, I'm this great investigator. I can do it. No, a lot of it is luck. It's
Right.
luck in being able
Someone
to.
told me that
Yep.
I just needed to do this.
Yep, that it is. And, being able to recruit sources and think outside the box. That's the successful guys, at headquarters cities or out in the RAs, which was always the best with the resident agencies when there's only 3 or 4 guys in an office, because you get the flexibility to go out and do everything, work every violation, which is what I liked.
So in your career, you had the opportunity to actually go overseas to, war zones, and you ended
Yep.
up, telling those stories. Because the FBI, I mean, I am aware of this because I've
Yep.
worked with them overseas, but if you could tell the story of why they went, foreign rather than domestic.
Well, after 9/11, and then when we got engaged in country in Iraq and Afghanistan, the FBI Director Mueller had mandated there's 2 tracks that you could, when you went to Iraq or Afghanistan, there was 2 things that you went. You either went as capacity building, so we would investigate, we would assist their law enforcement, and in Iraq we did the regime crimes. So RCLU, a group of agents went over, they were in Baghdad, they were situated we had the BAC, and they investigated crimes against the country by doing law enforcement, doing police things. And then we have the other group that were the tactical embeds. We were embedded with Special Operations Command to do the things that we do. We are the best interviewers / interrogators in the world. So we would go and be assigned to the colors, red, blue, and green. It started with HRT and then other.
So the tier 1, the best of the best.
Yep.
Yeah.
We would go because we could do interrogations or interviews. FBI doesn't interrogate, we interview, and do SSE, the sensitive site exploitation, which for us, CONUS is search warrants, but when on site it was SSC. So we could help that. So that's what we did, the 2 different tiers to assist Special Operation Command. So I was on the embedding with Special Operations Command. I went to Iraq 3 times, went to Afghanistan 4 to assist with interviews and SSE, to help out. And, later in the war, the tier 1s got better and better. So you had to go less and less on target. We would go more on when they would hit an HVT knowing that it was related to something that might have happened, that the death of a U.S. soldier or a Marine. So we would go in and collect the evidence and sign it all off. So one of your brethren or one of the agency guys that was there didn't have to testify. So we would testify. Right. So, I did that several times.
It was interesting, the SSE, like, so I had a mission set where I had FBI HRT on that we worked directly with, and I would give all of the evidence that we'd find to FBI, and we were trained on how to search rooms. And it's funny, just being in special operations, you're good at a lot of things, but when you're going and searching a house and you're really looking for passports from different countries that are hidden, or money that's hidden, or whatever it is, admittedly, I'll say this of myself, I was terrible at searching a room. Terrible, until someone showed me how to do it right. Mm-hmm. We'd basically like rat fuck the room.
Yep.
And then you're like, stop tearing everything apart and being aggressive, and start thinking like a criminal.
Yep.
Where are the documents? And what I found is that the guys who were really good at it were the ones who probably were good at sneaking out of their parents' house. Who were,
yep.
Somebody would be like, oh, they're in the air conditioned vent, and they'd pull it, and you're like, how? You went right to the thing. Like, you don't know anything that's here. It's just like, dude, I'm a shady guy. Yeah. So this is just like what I would do. And those were better at it. And, I was a little bit more, not as good at, sneaking away from my parents' house, I guess. But we definitely had just a totally different view of like how you clear a house, and like, all right, mm-hmm. next step, this is what you do. And I learned a lot from that, from having professionals show you.
Oh, yeah. And it was, HRT started the war going through, and then their success leaned on to bringing more and more agents in country, tactical guys and guys that were really, really good. So, and we were at the 2 detention facilities in Balad and Bagram, putting our guys in front of the HVTs that you guys would bring off the battlefield. You bring them off after one cycle. During the off cycle, we would get the guys to talk. We'd go to Falcon View, would point out where the next one. We would give you the next targets. So it's that give and take, and it was a great experience. It was a lot of fun, because it has the same mindset to go out with knuckle draggers. It's that type A personality to go into the war. It was a lot of fun. I have lifetime friends that I met, guys that were from either one of the colors, blue, red, or green. It was funny when we were sitting out talking earlier today, when you started talking about the colors and everything like that, it just brings it back or to the numbers 16 and 17, and where those are and things like that. A lot of successes, and it just showed that McChrystal was brilliant when he brought in the totality of the IC with JSOC, so his team of seniors was, guys from the Bureau, the agency, DIA, NGA, all of those, that to make the spear, you got to have all the arrows in the quiver. So it was a great experience. I enjoyed it.
So we'll start wrapping up, but I guess you've gone through, 3 careers at this point, and kind of going to a 4th career. What was it like taking all of that experience that you've had as, I guess all government service, right?
Yep.
So you go all government service, you're at the end of a career, and then you start a new one that's, it's still aligned, but what was that transition like? What lessons have you taken and learned and done that? And what have you gained from having a civilian career, being in charge of security?
I learned that the transition was tough to go from the Bureau to Blue Cross. It was tough because I was 55. There's no camaraderie. Right. The guys, my friends, or my age group is the CEO was Tim Huckle, the only guy that was basically my age on it. And going from basically a male-centric organization, we have, but, on the RAs, it was mostly guys that you dealt with, to a organization that has all the ages and both guys and girls. The first 6 months was tough. I had a couple of visits with HR, about the things that you can and can't say and how we can't talk to people. And it never was the person that I was talking to. It was always somebody overheard me dropping the bomb or talking about this and that. And it was a struggle. And I got to know our HR, Vicky, personally, because I spent a couple of times down there talking about it. But it just took time to integrate into it. And Blue Cross has been great. They had very limited technology when we started. So we would come in and make presentations to update our camera, every sort of technology that we upgraded. And as long as we could justify the why, they wanted to know, why do we need to do this? How are we going to how are we going to integrate it? The cost being, fiscally responsible. And then I started the program. And then when I hired guys in, I hired former sheriff's deputies and law enforcement. And I told them, when you come in, there is a learning curve towards it, because a majority of us, the people that we work with, have never seen the things that we've been through, and they don't kind of understand us sometimes. So the transition was easier for Chris, Tanner, and Jay than it was for me, because I got to pioneer through it and do the visits to HR and have the conversations with the vice president and with the boss and things like that. But it's been a great transition. They allow me to work the team and use my expertise, as long as we can justify the why. Why are we doing this? Why is this going to make it safer? Why is this important? That it's important for our employees, contractor vendors to feel safe, because you're spending a third of your life in this building and at our district offices. And we bring the situational awareness to know how to deal with not only active shooter, but workplace violence, and just dealing with life, spouses that kind of get crazy, or boyfriends, girlfriends, or people that show up at the office. So it's been really good at the transition. And I have friends that are working out in corporate America that it doesn't go as well. It doesn't go as smooth for them, but I enjoy it. Our C-suite is very receptive for it. Allows me to do what I do, and once I don't enjoy it anymore, I'll retire, because
What advice would you give to somebody who's gone from a career of government service to someone who's going to the civilian side, or whatever they may be, to the corporate entities? What would you tell them to go in with that perhaps was different, the lesson that you learned, so they could be more successful?
Open mindset. Go talk to the younger men and women to understand them more. My sons are both that age, but it's different talking to your son than it is somebody else. Just to go down, and I learned it by talking to some of our security guards who were younger, just to have conversation. How do they think? Not asking for their advice, but just asking, getting an understanding of them as a person, because they're not a 65-year-old white male that has, been there, done that, and been around, but deals with people type A's. It was a struggle for me to deal with type B's, and people that are laid back, because with this, sometimes I can be offensive just because of who I am, and it's just
the body.
Yes, it's just the package. The package is the mess sometimes, but it's understanding that what they're thinking. And I learned that because our HR, she said that, I'm going to give you some advice. It would probably help you to spend some time when you're in the cafeteria to not tell guys to pull their pants up, but to have conversations on, what they do, So that's the advice I would give, is you're going to have to work with them. You're going to have to embrace it, and you're going to have to get them to be collaborative, because they're the guys, the younger guys that are doing the IT, that are going to do my deployment. I can come up with the idea. I can buy this equipment, but I'm not deploying it. I'm using my IT, my information security, all of these guys, and they're younger guys. They're brainiacs. They're those type of guys. They're not of my ilk, but I still have to learn how to talk to them, how to relate with them, to get them buy-in to help me out, not just because I'm a crotchety old man.
Well, I want to probably cut it here. Is there any other last bit of wisdom that you want to share with everybody before we end it here?
Again, the mantra in everything that we do, to live a life worthy of the sacrifice that the men and women of our military and our first responders do. That's important to me.
Well, I'm honored that you joined us here, and I'm happy to have learned from you and got to share some of your story. It's incredible. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks, brother. I appreciate it.
Appreciate it.
That's it for this episode. If you want to check out more from the podcast, head to zeroeyes.com/nobel, where you can see show notes, read more about our guests, and suggest guests or topics of your own. Until next time, stay in the fight. Don't ring the bell.